Guys, I tell you what we're going to do is that Kevin at a certain point has to...
Maybe he might come after the show or during. So.
Okay, no problem. So what I would suggest we do is let's just do the show. Kev, we'll do the halacha after. We've got some complicated issues to deal with, and I don't know.
Okay, let's do it. That's cool.
Right, and then we. I tell you what, if you're going to be under 2 minutes, we can do it where you can start. But we just
2 minutes is fine. Once.
Okay. The show is dedicated to all the cholim of Klal Yisrael, and for everything else that Klal Yisrael needs. Also wanted just for somebody that's sick, Nina Bashira, just a full recovery. And Kevin, I hope you recover from your COVID and you stay well, my friend.
Oh man, thank you. Getting there. Well, the flu's going away. Thank you. Okay, so just a quick one. I'll keep to 2 minutes here.
Sure.
To honor Shabbos, it is good to make sure to have at least 2 cooked dishes. It is also good to eat fish at each of the 3 meals, unless one doesn't take well to fish or just likes it. For Shabbos is meant to be enjoyed, not suffered, as stated later. If the fishmongers inflate their prices unreasonably, community leaders should ban buying fish for a number of weeks until they lower their prices again. Then we say, okay, even if the price is raised by less than a third, the ban should be imposed out of consideration for the poor. Okay.
I think this community needs to listen to that vote you gave for kashrut generally.
You know what? I couldn't agree with Gavin.
Out of control.
I couldn't agree with Gavin more. In fact, before Gavin uttered it, I was thinking that, I went to, without mentioning names, to certain delis and butcheries and other things, and I tell you something, they are taking bad advantage of the Jewish community and really being unfair and salaried people. I don't know how they afford being able to have a Shabbat even during the week. I don't know how they can afford it. It's just it's not right, Kevin. It really is not right.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
So Kevin, thank you. I mean, I think that's an essential lesson. Really, please God, we do it. So we've got some very interesting topics that I had a look at within the Gemara that seemed very contradictory when first reading it. I had to learn it and learn it and learn it and try and see if I could come through and wade through what seemed like overlapping and contradictory statements. So what I've decided to do is teach some of it and not some of it. Why? Because when you read too much detail, sometimes it will end up just confusing you. So I've managed to make sense out of all of it, but not before I thoroughly got confused by the detail. And then you can't ignore the detail because the detail's there to obviously teach you added aspects, which seem to contradict the base statements. And then I had to wade through it and work it. And with Hashem's help, please God, I've managed to. But what I want to do is unpack it to you guys in a very easy manner. I think that's the basis of it. So let me just tell you where we ended off last time. We were talking about, if you look at on Lulav and Etrog for Mahuda, where you add a third of the value to the set, the calculation can be either in or outside the calculation. So what do we mean? Is that if we take a normal set of a Lulav and Etrog, and we say it's 600 shekels, just say it's 600 shekels. It will never be 600 shekels, but let's say 600 rand. That is realistic in rand terms because it's imported. And let's say that for the Mahuda set, it's a third extra. Then what we do is we take 600 rand divided by 3 to get the 1/3 amount, which is an extra. Kevin, how many rand? 600 divided by 3. Right, so a third of 600 is 200. So we add the 600 rand to the 200 rand, and we say that a Mahuda set, you should spend no more than 800 rand. That's one way to look at it. That's where you take the total and you add 1/3 to it. The other way you can do it is you can do it where you've got the total of the Mahuda set and divide that. So the total of the Mahuda set, you could say, if you it's actually like 900 shekels divided, 900 rand divided by 3 is how much is each third worth?
300.
Correct. So therefore, the average set would be, how much do I need to spend on an average set? We could say 600 rand. Okay, which means if you say that it's 600 rand as a base, it means instead of spending 800 rand to get it to a Mahuda level, you actually have to spend it worked out from the outside, meaning the total figure, which would be 900 rand, not 800 rand. So it depends how you do your calculations. Is your third included in the total, or is your third excluded from the total and you add it afterwards? And that would determine the amount. And we'll see how it's relevant now. So what we're saying is, with regards to the 1/5 surcharge, what happens there is we say if there was now the 1/5 surcharge is based on the principal amount, right? So we say in that case, if your principal amount is 4 zuz, your 1/5 surcharge would actually be a zuz. It wouldn't be, what do you call it? It wouldn't be 4/5 of a zuz. How do we work that out? Exactly on this sort of principle, that if you take 4 zuz, that is your principal amount, and you add 1/5 to it, which means you pay a total of 5 zuzim, right? And out of the 5 zuzim, 1/5 is a surcharge, and 4 zuz is the principal amount. That's how we get to 1 zuz. If you want to say you're calculating the 1/5 surcharge as a total of the principal, which is 4 zuz, then you pay 4/5 of the zuz. Okay? So how the Gemara is working it out is it says, all right, let's work it out where the surcharge is included with the principal, and then it's 1/5 of that, so it's 1 zuz for that and 4 zuz for the principal. Easy. Let's just keep it easy, right? Okay, so fine. So the Gemara's argument then is to say, listen, we want to know if the words of R Yaakov apply in this case, because R Yaakov said, whenever there is, we were talking about a case where a custodian is caught, said that somebody stole the deposit that was given to him, and then he was caught lying by witnesses. So according to R Yaakov, he said that in that case, you have what you call the atonement offering, as well as the penalty offering. Why? Because the penalty is when you're caught lying at the oath, when witnesses come afterwards. So in that particular case, you have both the atonement aspect of the 1/5 surcharge and the principal. Gavin, it's noisy. Can you come back?
Yeah, I'm just dehydrated. Sorry, just carry on. I'm just pouring water.
It's distracting. Let me wait for you.
Sorry. No, I shouldn't do this. I just feel like fainting. Sorry.
No problem.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. So, but I don't want you to faint for anything. I'm just saying the noise is distracting. Let's just go again, what we're saying. 3 opinions. Rav Yaakov saying, look, obviously there's no penalty when a person comes clean morally. The custodian says, listen, I've done wrong. When he says he stole, and he lied about it. And then the witnesses come. We say, okay, so then he pays the 1/5 surcharge and the asham offering. That's fine, but there's no penalty because he came clean before the witnesses testified again. And in a case where he comes clean after the witnesses, there are 3 opinions. Rav Yaakov says, listen, he's still eligible for the asham offering and the 1/5 surcharge, which goes to the person he lied and stole from. Plus, he doesn't get him out of the kefil payment, the knas, the penalty payment, and he has to pay that in addition to the principal to the owner. It's not going to get him off, because how serious is an atonement if he's trying to get off? It's not serious. not at all. So we're saying that R Yaakov also made a principle that when the kefil payment, the knas, the penalty payment, mimics the 1/5 surcharge, you don't have to pay it twice, as long as the amounts are identical. Okay? When the amounts are not identical, the knas, the penalty payment, has to be made, the principal has to be made, and only then can you have an atonement to the person on 1/5. Because how can you really be sorry if you haven't paid it back? It's lip service then. Nonsense. The Asham offering is a different level. That's paid to Hashem, because a person must be scared of Hashem, I'll tell you that much. So that's now Rav Yaakov says both are due. Now the sages don't agree. The sages, if you remember, turn around and say, listen, they read the verse that you how do we say it exactly? I mean, there's two verses. There's one from Numbers, which is about Midbar, chapter 5, verse 7. Remember the clause, and he shall return that which he sent in its principal amount, and its fifth he shall add to it. Okay? So that refers to his restitution of the principal, and then rather than to the Asham offering. Because the Asham offering is now mentioned in another verse. That's in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 5, verse 25. It says, and he shall bring his Asham offering to Hashem. So how does this actually relate? Because the rabbis say that when it says in its principal amount and its fifth, it's saying that when the custodian isn't caught lying, okay, in that particular case, and there's no penalty payment, only then it's genuine and he pays its 1/5 surcharge, and then you would pay the Asham offering. But if afterwards he's caught lying and he comes clean, then you pay the penalty and the principal amount, but then you don't pay to the original owner the 1/5 surcharge. But you do pay the Asham offering, because that's a separate pasuk and that you pay to Hashem. Okay? Now Rabbi Shimon Ben Yochai goes one step further. He says neither the fifth nor the Asham is paid in a place where there's a twofold payment. Okay, so anyway, the Brasa states that 1/5 surcharge is accounted for with his twofold payment. Those are the words of Rav Yaakov. So now we're dealing with a case in where we can work it out. What's the case in which the ruling applies? So it says, if you say that it applies when originally the deposit that was in the custodian's hand was declared stolen, and then he was caught out lying, and that was worth 4 zuzim. Okay? So in other words, at the point where he stole it, it was worth 4 zuzim. And then at the case where it originally landed up in trial, it was worth 4 zuzim. So Gavin did make a distinction the other day, which he understood the concept that, I mean, if the trial took place in August and the custodian ended up shechting it in June, we don't see what the August payment was at the court date of that particular article of that animal. It's worked at the point where it's shechted, because you can no longer make remuneration by returning the animal itself. So obviously, but that's still different to when he stole it in January. So there's a difference between the point at which he stole it, at which the principal is paid, according to Rav, and the point at which you pay the penalties, at which is the court date where it assesses where the selling or slaughtering took place. Make sense? So we're saying, right, in that case, how would it actually work? Because if we want to apply Rav Yaakov's case, where the exact amount of the 1/5 surcharge, which is based on the principle, matches the kefil penalty payment, knas, where you don't have to pay it in duplicate, what would it be? So the first case that it looks at is that, look, originally, it's now not talking about an animal, because an animal, remember, a sheep would be 4-fold, an ox would be 5-fold. 4-fold meaning a quarter for the penalty and 3 times the amount, a quarter for the principal and 3 times the amount for the penalty, and an ox, the principal would be 1/5, and the 4/5 would be the penalty. So we're saying, let's just call it a normal keg of wine, or a chardonnay of wine, where it could appreciate in value because there's no local winery in Cape Town producing the same Chardonnay. You have to get it from California. Well, it drops in value because you used to be able to only get it from California upon import. And then a winery opened up in Cape Town where they saw a gap in the market. So in that case, we say, okay, so let's deal with the case where it's either a donkey or an inanimate object where there's only a twofold payment, right? So we will say, right, okay. So if we say that it applies where originally it was worth 4 zuzim, and in the end, when it was in the court case, it was worth 4 zuzim, can Rav Yaakov then rule that his 1/5 surcharge is accounted for with his twofold payment? Now, the question is no, because if we look at the mass, again, 4 zuz it's worth originally. You pay the 1/5 surcharge, okay? And if you say that that's a zuz, let's call it an outer calculation, not the 3/4 calculation. So there are 5 payments in total, being the 1/5 surcharge and 4 zuzim, 1 zuz being the surcharge and 4 zuzim worth in terms of the principal. Okay, so then if it's worth originally 4 zuz and the Kevin, the 1/5 surcharge, because as an atonement to the person that you lied and stole from, it's not the penalty, is added at the end for the kefil payment. Okay, that doesn't match up to the kefil payment, because in this case we say that in the end it was worth 4 zuzim. So if the bottle of Chardonnay at the end was worth the same as it was in the beginning, and it hadn't appreciated in value, or it hadn't depreciated in value, and it was still worth 4 zuzim, in that particular case, the 1 zuz that you pay as the 1/5 surcharge doesn't match the 4 zuzim, because, by the way, the 4 zuzim would be the principal, but what would the penalty kefil knaus payment be? It would be 8 zuzim. Okay, or it wouldn't be 8 zuzim, it would be 4 zuzim. Why would it be 4 zuzim? Because the principal is 4 zuz, and the penalty, if it's inanimate or like an animal that's not a sheep or an ox, would again be the same mimicked amount as the principal, because it said he shall pay double. So the first amount goes to the principal, and the second amount goes to the penalty, right? So if it started off at 4 zuz and it ended off as 4 zuz, Rav is saying that the principal is paid at the time that it's stolen. The penalty amount is worked out at the time of the court date. Okay, so therefore, if it ends off as 4 zuz, your penalty would be 4 zuz, and it would mimic the principal. But the 1/5 surcharge is 1 zuz. So this is not a case where Rav Yaakov's 1/5 surcharge would match the amount of the 4 zuz penalty and the 4 zuz principal. Because in a Chardonnay bottle that was stolen, worth 4 zuz originally, when they assess it months later, it's still worth 4 zuz. So the principal is done at the time it was stolen, 4 zuz. At the time of the court date, 4 zuz. So then the 1/5 surcharge is 1 zuz. And therefore that doesn't match the kefil payment. So this cannot be the case, the Gemara is saying, in which Rav Yaakov is talking about. So then it's going to try another case. It says, am I making sense so far, guys, before we go on? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Am I making sense to Kevin, to Gavin? Guys?
If the kefil payment is the same as the 1/5 surcharge, is that where you're getting to this? You're coming to this point.
So what I'm saying is as follows. If there's a case, Rav Yaakov says, if there's a case where the 1/5 surcharge manages to match the numerical value of the kefil payment, you don't have to pay the 1/5 surcharge in addition to the kefil payment, but the amounts must be exact. So we're saying this is clearly not the case. Because let me just break it up again. I stole from you a bottle of Chardonnay. Right. The time that I stole it from you, it was worth 4 zuz. That was in January. By the time it came to trial in June, because you loved that, it was worth suing me for. By the time we came to trial in June, It hadn't appreciated or depreciated, so that bottle of Chardonnay was still worth 4 zuz. So then we say for inanimate objects or normal animals, then you're paying double. You're paying the 4 zuz for the penalty, and the club that I get is paying another 4 zuz. Sorry, I pay you back, Kevin, 4 zuz for the principal, or give you the bottle of Chardonnay back, and then I pay an extra 4 zuz as a penalty. So the penalty mimics the principal. You pay double. That's all. You pay double.
A twofold payment.
Yes. We're talking about an inanimate object here. I'm using that example to keep it simple. And the Gemara here is using that example to keep it simple. So it's twofold. Now, I'm really sorry about it. I've apologized, and I was caught by witnesses. So the one for surcharge that I have to pay on the principle of the 4 zuz bottle of champagne would be 1 zuz. But I can't do that, and I can't not pay that and say that it mimics the amount of the penalty payment, because that's 4 zuz. So I would have to pay 1 zuz in addition to the 4 zuz, which is the penalty plus the one for surcharge, plus give you the bottle of Chardonnay or the 4 zuz. So clearly this is not a case. I just want to move on where R Yaakov is talking about. So let's see a case where it would. Let's see a case where it would, in principle. So it's referring now, it says, rather is it not referring to where originally it was worth 4 zuzim, and in the end it was worth 1 zuz. So let me give you an example, Kev, is that it was worth 4 zuz because I stole a bottle of your Chardonnay that was imported from France. You could only get Chardonnay from France, right? So it was imported, and you loved this thing, and I stole it, and I liked it, and I'm an alcoholic. So I took it, and by the time it came to trial, because it was worth 4 zuz, the price dropped, because by the time I drank it, at the point just before trial, because my nerves were shot, I needed to drink it to calm down my nerves, it was only worth a zuz. Why? Because there was a winery that opened up in Cape Town in competition to this French winery, and now the price for Chardonnay dropped because there was local competition. So again, when I stole it, it was worth 4 zuz. Now at the time of trial or consumption, it is only worth 1 zuz. In that particular case, it works out. Why? Because I pay the 1/5 surcharge of my atonement, and my the Hashem I give separately. That's for sure. The Hashem I give that. So the 1/5 surcharge I give to you, Kevin, because I am sorry, but that is based on the principle. Now the principle was worth 4 zuz. Fine, boom. So the 1/5 surcharge is a zuz. Okay, because in total there's 5 zuz. 1 zuz of it is 1/5 of the 5 zuz for the surcharge, and 4 zuz is the principal. Fine, that's done. Now I still owe you the careful payment, but the careful payment is based, according to Rav and Rabbi, it's based at the time of what the article is worth at the court date. Now, since it's dropped to a zuz, okay, I owe you a zuz for that, because the penalty is based on what's assessed at the court date, what the value of the article is based on the court date. So in other words, Kevin, if it was still worth a zuz, if it was still worth 4 zuz at the time of court, I would have to pay you 4 zuz penalty, just like I paid you the 4 zuz principal. But because at the court date there was a winery in the interim that opened up in Cape Town, and it depreciated the value of the wine to where it's worth only a zuz now, the penalty is based on the value now. The principal at the time that I started, that's 4 zuz. But now the penalty is only based on the current value. So therefore that's 1 zuz. This in a case, now, so I'll pay you the 1 zuz, but before I pay you the 1 zuz, I would have to pay you the 1 zuz surcharge as well, because originally it was worth 4 zuz, and the 1/5 surcharge to say I'm sorry, an atonement offering to you, okay, not an offering only to Hashem, but an atonement apology to you, would be 1/5 of the principal, and it was worth 4 zuz. The 1/5 total, whether you call it, is worth a zuz, right? So since it's worth a zuz, And since my penalty, because the value of the one is dropped, subsequently is worth the zuz, I don't have to make that 1/5 surcharge because both the amounts equal the zuz, and therefore combined, they serve as both the atonement and as the penalty amount.
Can I just make a comment there? That's only going to happen when there's a deterioration in value. So which means so just let me finish. Sorry, I haven't finished. Just making, I know you know that. So I'm saying it's only going to happen then, which means that it's really giving the thief like an additional, like he's getting off a bit. He doesn't have to pay it because there's a depreciation, He shouldn't get off anything. That's just my humble opinion.
Okay, I think Gavin's got a good point there. And I think if you see...
Like they'd be lenient towards it.
No, I'm agreeing with you. So I'm saying in the value of what you're saying, if you see what the Hashem offering cost him, it'll cripple him financially, believe me. By the time he's originally stolen only 4 zuz. He's paid it back. He's made restitution. He's now paying a penalty. He's really sorry. He's happening that Hashem determined the amount of what it's valued at now. So Hashem has given him almost that break, that bit of alleviation. Hashem chose the timing of when he would have to pay the apology offering. So therefore, if Hashem chose it, Hashem in his wisdom knows the right time. And therefore, that's relaxed. But the sham is heavy in terms of cost, very heavy. So he's paying through the nose. But you've got to trust that Hashem has chosen the timing as such, and therefore Hashem knows what he's doing. It could have been any other price. I agree with you. I thought about what you're saying, and I thought it was so valid. And that's why I've thought about this issue. So you've got to trust Hashem's intervention, just like if a person accidentally gets killed by the Beis Din and stuff comes to light after Adim Zomamim, he lost his life, and it was no accident, because it says in Pikei Avot, those, see that skull fold floating in the water, he drowned others, so others drowned him, and those that drowned him shall be drowned. Hashem's got a plan. So I think it's a good point, but just keep that in mind. Now, why are we getting to all of this? We've got just a brief amount of time left. We're trying to say, if this is the case, then it actually proves that Rav is correct. Because evidently this Brisa holds, as Rav rules, that the thief, just remember that the opinion about how the thief pays, this is only Rav's opinion. It's not the only opinion. But this is actually a proof for Rav. Why? Because this Brisa holds, as Rav rules, that the thief pays for the principal according to the stolen article's value at the time he stole it, and the 2-fold, 4-fold, and 5-fold payments according to the stolen article's value when he's sued in court. Okay? In other words, if both the principal and the kefil would be paid in accordance with the stolen article's value at the time the case is brought to court, that 1/5 surcharge on the principal would be worth only a quarter of a zuz, not a zuz. And if both the principal and the kefil would be paid in accordance with the stolen article's value at the time of the theft, then the kefil payment would be 4 zuzim, not 1 zuz. So necessarily then this brisa, which basically states in effect that it's possible for the kefil payment and the 1/5 surcharge and the principal to be identical, has to agree with Rav's ruling. That the principal is determined at the time when it's stolen, and the penalty payment is assessed at the time when it's sold or slaughtered, but retroactively, if not either, at the court date, but certainly a later date juncture to when it was stolen. In other words, when it changed status. So this brisa seems to actually agree with Rav. I mean, it's very difficult to see how it isn't. And therefore, the way Rav's assessing seems to be absolutely correct. Brilliant. There's one issue, though. There is another way to look at it, okay? And the way to look at it is as follows, is that the Gemara rejects the proof. They say there is a way to look at it. Rava, now this is genius, said, in fact, I'm saying his name again, just so you see how genius it is, Rava, R-A-V-A, said, in fact, it might be that the brisa is dealing with originally, the stolen article was worth 4 zuzim, And now 2, when the case is brought to court, it's still worth 4 zuzim. Okay? So then we're saying, but hang on, if that's the case, then, and it's still worth 4 zuzim now, then the 4 zuz penalty would be, would not match the 4 zuz penalty would be a little bit of a difficult thing. And we say, so how do you match it? How do you get, if it's based on the surcharge? Okay, so Kevin, I want to ask you this. If it's based on the surcharge, because the principal amount is 4 zuz, and the one for surcharge should be a zuz. Okay? And we're saying if it was worth 4 zuz and now it's worth 4 zuz, how would the 1/5 surcharge match the 4 zuz? It could only be according to Rav, and he's saying no. Rav is saying not. In fact, it might be where the price is dealing with where originally the stolen article was worth 4 zuzim, and now 2, when the case is brought to court, it's still worth 4 zuzim. And as for the difficulty this raises, that if so, the kefil payment amounts to 4 zuzim, whereas the one for surcharge amounts only to a zuz. And the larger kefil payment cannot therefore account for the one for surcharge. In other words, you'd have to make that one for surcharge amounts wouldn't equal. I will answer as follows, Rava said. What case are we dealing with here? With a case in which he swore falsely that the deposit was stolen, and then swore again and again for a total of 4 times, and then he confessed. And the Torah states regarding such a case, and its 5th he shall add to it. By using the plural fifths, the Torah indicates numerous fifths with respect to one principle. So what it's saying is that you don't necessarily have to say that it was a case where, according to Rav, the principle was worked out at the time when he stole it, and the penalty payment is done at the court date or where it changed status, where it was sold or slaughtered. In fact, it could be that it was all worked out at the time where it was brought to court. It was all worked out at the time when it was, for example, at the time that it was originally stolen. It doesn't have to mimic Rav. All that has to happen there is that the person has to make a false oath more than 1 time, 4 times, and therefore it would still match. Does that make sense? Because each time he swore falsely in denial of a monetary obligation, he's liable for another 5th surcharge. It's not that you swear multiple times and there's only 1/5. So even though each oath was in reference to the same principle, he made this false declaration 4 times. So in our case, where the custodian swore falsely 4 times that the deposit worth 4 zuzim was stolen, each oath makes him liable to 1/5 surcharge of a zuz. So his 4 false oaths make him liable simultaneously by a single confession to 4 zuz, which is identical to the kefil payment of 4 zuz. So we're saying that doesn't prove Rav's case, because we said before that the only way that the reason why it did prove Rav's case is because the principle, which was 4 zuz at the time, had to be worth 4 zuz. The penalty was 1 zuz. The surcharge is based on the principle, which is 1 zuz. The amounts equal. So you have to turn around and say that the principle is worked out at the time when it's stolen, and the penalty is made at the time where the thief is sued in court, or at least at the time at a later juncture where the article changed status because it was sold or slaughtered. So Rav is saying that that's not necessarily the case, that it has to be judged at that time period. Maybe the principle, as well as the penalty, can be worked out either at the time of theft or at the time when the thief is sued in court. Because all you have to turn around and say then is that there were multiple acts of lying at which he's paying a 1/5 surcharge either way. So it's not a proof for Rav. Okay, and on this note, we'll end. Am I making any sense, guys?
Damon, the one-fifth of 4 is 0.8.
Yes,
not 1.
Yes, but we've already discussed that last time and this time. I'll go through it again. Is that it depends.
You see, I need this written down. I understand it, but if it's not written down, I don't get it. It's very
No,
difficult
but
for
you'll
me
get it
to-
after this. We've got 2 minutes. Give me 2 minutes.
It has to be in writing for me. Otherwise,
Okay,
that doesn't sink in.
Give me 2 minutes because you're super smart.
Okay.
I will put it in writing if you don't get it. Let me try it.
Please. Okay, let's try. Okay.
Let's try. I know Kevin's super smart. I also need things in writing. So Kevin is 100% correct. I'll make it in writing, Kev. Okay. So let's try this for 2 minutes. What we're saying is, if you look at it from a bird's eye view as a total, and you say there's 5 zuz, right? You just take an amount of 5 zuz. The principal was worth 4 zuz. Bang, that's gone. That's paid back to you because I stole your Chardonnay, right? That leaves 1 zuz. And that 1 zuz is a surcharge, which is basically 1/5 of the total. And that goes to you as a 1/5 surcharge of the total. If I'm adding 1/5 to the amount of 4 and not seeing it as a total, I do only pay 4/5. If I'm seeing the 1/5 as a overall fraction of the total, it's 1 zuz. If I'm seeing it added to 4 zuz worth, it is 4/5. You're absolutely correct.
Because that's a penalty. That's a separate payment.
No, the penalty is a separate payment. I'm not talking about that.
The 1/5 is a separate payment.
Yes, the 1/5. Don't worry about the penalty. I'm saying I can either say to you, look, I've got 500 rand. I have to pay Kevin a principal back of 400 rand for the Chardonnay I stole, and therefore that $100 extra, which was 1/5 of it, I owe him in terms of an apology. Okay, there's nothing to do with the penalty. That's just an apology to you. So therefore, 400 rand is the principal. That's 4/5, and the 1/5 of the total I owe to Kevin as an apology is 100 rand. That's how we get 100 rand instead of 80 rand. If I say, okay, I owe Kevin the principal, and Kevin's right according to certain opinions, of 400 rand, I then owe him 1/5 surcharge. It means I only owe Kevin an extra 80 rand. So according to some opinions, Kevin's completely correct. We're using the opinion of working it from the total for ease of this Gemara. But there are opinions that hold like Kevin. Correct. Excellent, guys. Arthur, let's just see you before we cut the video so that...
Yeah.